Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sarah Hughes, and I'm with ABC Technologies. Kandy Communications is part of that, and I'm Senior Vice President of Customer Experience and Channel Marketing. And today's topic is deploying Kandy Business Solutions over the top, and that's in a bring your own broadband model. With me, I have um, two panelists that are partners of ours, and I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. But I do want to talk about a little bit of logistics here. Your mics are muted down. And you do have the chat capability, so please ask your questions, any of your comments, those types of things in the chat. And Sharon Posadny on my team will be our MC for the questions, and I'll be the MC today for the panelists. So I'm going to introduce them. Our agenda also covers several topics about deploying unified communications as a service over the top of someone else's broadband. And so we'll talk about remote logistics. We'll talk about what specifically that they have chosen in their portfolio to deploy that way. Any network settings that they have tips and tricks and recommendations on, any recommended tools, what happens the day of cutover, how they handle that, and ongoing support, how do they handle that? And then at the very end, we'll open it up for additional questions. But Rick Phillips is with us. He's part of IS Squared. He's based here in beautiful Texas, and he's the Director of Managed Services. And also with us today is Rico, or Ricardo Ordonez, and he's the Real-Time Communications Practice Manager based in California for Juxto. Now, both of these partners have been with us for more than 6 years. We've worked alongside each other for a long time. And both of their companies have been under different names and changed along the way. Both of them have deployed Kandy not only in the country that they're in nationally, not just one state or any of that, just across all of the United States, but also internationally. So several of our partners are on the webinar that are international to us. Both of these are wholesale distributor partners, and what that means is that they sell to downstream resellers who in turn touch and manage that end customer. Now, both are and have been in the past reseller partners as well, selling direct to enterprise customers or small to medium businesses. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rick to introduce himself and IS Squared here, and then Rico.
Hey, thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having us on or being part of the webinar. Like Sarah mentioned, been a Kandy partner since 2015, and you know, Sarah, you've been great to work with, as well as the rest of the organization, whether that's in a sales capacity or support. So appreciate everything that you guys have done for us. It's been great seeing the platform mature and continue to add features and seeing some more formalized sprint cycles and things like that to get those features and bug fixes to deployed. So you guys have been a great partner. We do sell the full suite of KBS services, you know, including live support, Kandy call center, and all those other wrappers. As Sarah mentioned, we do have partners and customers here in the Americas, as well as EMEA and APAC. And taking the KBS platform to market, you know, through direct customers and that we work with, and some of that includes other services that IS Squared does as well. And then we work with partners to help train them, provide that tier 2 support to them before escalating up to KBS. So with our partners, we do, you know, kind of a formal onboarding session where we train them up, get them used to the platform, how to build out customers, their products and catalogs and things of that nature. And then that support afterwards, you know, comes through us before we go to Kandy. So again, you guys have been great to work with, Sarah. Thanks for having us on today, and appreciate all your support over the past few years.
Thank you so much. And Rico.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ricardo Ordonez, Rico for short. Thank you, Sarah, for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Juxto's been an early adopter of Kandy. We've been partners with Kandy since about 2013. We've been reselling Kandy services in North America, Canada, and the US since then. Just like Rick, we sell and support a full suite of KBS offerings, including live support, Kandy call center, Traditionally, we've gone direct to enterprise as well as build our reseller base. But today we're limited to selling through resellers. But that's a recent shift that we made in the last 12 months. So we have a lot of experience deploying Kandy direct to the end user. And about 18 months ago, Juxta was acquired by Synoptek, and Synoptek is a multinational MSP, one of the largest MSPs in North America, and all of our direct to enterprise relationships that we had at Juxta transferred to Synoptek, and so today, yeah, we're strictly through partner resellers.
Great. Okay, so we're going to kick it off, and I'm going to ask questions. And again, those of you who are on the webinar, feel free through the chat to ask your questions, and Sharon will interject them in. But I'm going to start with you, Ricardo, and then we'll shift over to Rick. What do you deploy? Specifically the SIP phones. Do you drop ship them? Do you pre-stage them? How do you do that?
Sure. We've deployed anywhere from Yealink to Cisco to Polys. Today we're more Poly-centric. Obviously, we want to leverage that zero-touch provisioning. Really help simplify the deployment of the devices. And we drop ship from our distributor. So we will place an order to the distributor. They will drop ship. If we can't ZTP, then we'll pay the distributor to provision the phones for us. What was the other question, Sarah?
So the pre-staging and that kind of stuff, those are things that you have your phone distributor do.
We do.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do.
And then, do you have multiple distributors, or do you have one in particular that you work closely with?
So with Poly, you have to have an authorized distributor. So we have one distributor that we work with primarily, which is ScanSource.
Okay. All right, and then what about you, Rick? For the SIP phones, how do you do those? Do you stage them? Do you drop ship?
Yeah, so typically it is drop ship, right? Like Rico mentioned, leveraging zero touch provisioning. It's a beautiful feature. It just makes that time on site so much less and so much easier on the end customer. So we have pre-staged phones before, right? And there's certainly some value in that to make sure that it registers to the platform. You roll out any out of box failures, things of that nature. So it's not that there's no value in it, but kind of need to read the customer a bit and make sure that expectations are set going in. When we do a lot of remote deployment, so when we drop ship a phone to site, we kind of need that point person there that can help us if zero touch provisioning doesn't work, right? Sometimes it's as simple as doing a factory default on the phone. Sometimes we need to do a manual upgrade, things like that in order to get the ZTP to kick in. So it's just kind of gauging and working with the customer. Do Polycom and Yealink, I think like Rico, we lead with and prefer Poly a bit, but I think that Yealink has taken some steps here recently, and I think they're closing that gap, just from ease of deployment, the integration with the platform, things like that. I think Yealink has come a long way in the past few years.
One of those, who actually places the phones? Do you have the customer do it? Do you hire contractors to come in? Either one of you. Yeah,
very, very seldom do we bring in a third party to do that. If it is, we've got offices all over the country, but that's not saying that we're in every market. So if we need to roll somebody to site to assist with that, we can. But more often than not, it is the customer that's placing those out. And it's like we said, it's a pretty easy process. All you gotta do is plug it in. So, and we have some documents put together about how to find the IP address of the phone, how to do a factory default on the phone, just quick little one-pagers that the customer can reference when they're placing those phones out.
That's a great idea. What about you, Rico?
We actually do roll out somebody to the site, because we require an edge device implemented at each site. And so usually that contractor will distribute the phones for us. Sometimes if the customer has a wherewithal to do it, they'll do it. But I would say typically we're doing that for them.
Great. And then in your portfolio of phones, I'm kind of throwing this one at you, but do you support every single Polycom phone, or do you kind of shrink that down to a subset of that? Rico, what are your thoughts there?
Today we're pushing VVX 50s, so the 250s, the 350s, the 450s, current gen of Poly.
What about you, Rick?
Yeah, we're trying, we're trying to get there. We if it's supported on KBS, we support it as well, and there's some times where we are selling that phone, and there's other times where the customer may already have existing phones that we're moving off of another platform, right? So, anything net new, we would lead with the 50 models like Rico said, but we have a lot of customers trying to leverage an existing investment, that don't want to purchase new phones and don't really have to. So I would say we support the wider range of those phones, and I know we touch on remote support later on, so I'll
Yeah, we do.
tie into that here in a bit, but that certainly plays in there with the types of phones that you support.
So
So,
Sarah, just by contrast with Rick, we'll have a customer, they'll have existing polyphones. They do work with KBS. They don't want to make the investment. We will make it, we do not want to have to figure out um, how to swap those Macs out. We'll just end up shipping new phones, and we'll make concessions on the price to swap out the phones. We find it a lot simpler to deploy new phones than having to show up on the environment and try to swap the serials and coordinate the migration. And we've just always preferred to make them an offer they can't refuse and force them to swap out the phones.
and so that helps
And
in the support side of
yeah,
things. Yeah.
and we have a trade-in program, so we'll buy back their old phones from them. So between the trade-in program and making, we have a DAS program where they can rent the phones. So between the DAS program, between our trade-in program, we heavily, request that they don't leave the existing phones in the environment.
And that's device as a service. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you ask the customer to do themselves, either one of you?
The only thing I guess I would add in here is the soft phones, right? So we have customers that only leverage the Smart Office desktop client. So, helping them with the MSI distribution to all the workstations, things of that nature, right? That's often an environment that we don't have access to. So I think it's another piece where, and again, depending upon the size of the client, if it's a smaller customer that doesn't have their own IT staff, where it's very, very limited, then it's leveraging some documentation, walking the end user through downloading that client from the end user portal. But the larger deployments, we definitely see, using automated methods to get that soft client rolled out.
And just to clarify, that MSI is something that you give to an IT group, and then they push that out. Maybe they have their desktops locked down where employees can't load software themselves, or maybe they restrict it. Okay,
Correct.
great. Sharon, are there any questions so far on the remote
No
logistics?
questions so far, Sarah.
Okay, great. So let's talk about what you deploy, and you kind of touched on some of this. Do you do just SIP phones on some things? Do you do just soft phones? Do you actually put a session border controller, a firewall, a router, that kind of stuff? So what physical things do you deploy there? And Rick, let's start with you.
Sure. So it is typically just the phones and the soft phones. There is a ton of value in deploying something like an edge mark out there on site. Gives you a lot more visibility into what's going on. We don't always require that. It's something that we have leveraged before, but it is not a requirement. So typically just the phones, the soft phones. We have customers with other services that we offer where maybe we do control the network, and it is part of a complete solution that we're selling, the network, the firewall, the UC solution. And there's other customers that we have where it's just UC. So, it's kind of a mixed bag depending upon the client and what their needs are. But yeah, typically just the phones, helping them deploy the soft phones. In specific and strategic cases, we can include an edge mark in there, and it certainly helps.
And what about you, Rico?
So we definitely obviously deploy hard phones, soft phones. A session border controller is rare. It does happen depending on the type of end user, the complexity of it, and maybe elements in their environment. But we do force the Edgemark 2900 as part of the deployment strategy. And in fact, it's a bit of a litmus test for whether we'll take the client or not. And so as we've grown, it used to be, what size client are you willing to take? You take a 1 to 2 user account, probably not. So where's that line in the sand of how low you'll go? And
your cost versus margin.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what happens is the smaller accounts are the more expensive accounts because they don't have the wherewithal to have the proper infrastructure, and as a result, they end up eating you alive with tickets. And so our litmus test on whether we'll accept an account that's smaller is whether they're willing to deploy the edge mark and the proper devices. If they're not, then we'll pass because it won't be worth the amount of tickets and the constant frustration downstream. But if they're small and they're willing to spend the money to deploy the correct devices, then we'll do it. And so we always deploy the EdgeMark 2900. Obviously, they need switches. If they don't have their own switches, we don't deploy firewalls or any of that.
So Rico, there is a question. Do you build the price of the router into your seat cost, or do you charge that extra to the customer?
No, it's a separate line item and it's a rental. So
Okay.
there's a monthly fee for it. In the past, we would let them own it after 36 payments, and then we eventually evolved to just reducing the payment so it was less, so it wasn't as much of an obstacle for entry, but they never own it.
Okay, thank you.
And
So
that
more
allows you to
perpetual.
change it out too, right? And upgrade it
Yeah,
and all that stuff.
yeah, and it allows us to keep our MRR as high as possible. So we're very focused on our MRR.
Yeah, good. How do you get nationwide numbers and international numbers and that kind of stuff? So what is your plan for that? Because obviously you guys aren't putting out soft switches and gateways every, hop off and that kind of stuff that you guys deploy in. So what do you do there? And we'll start with you, Rico.
We get our numbers nationally in the US from bandwidth. And then sometimes bandwidth can get Canadian numbers, but in Canada, it's typically Bell. And then
Bell Canada.
international, we've got a couple different carriers we use. We've used Pure IP, Telserve, it just depends. But we haven't done a ton internationally, so sounds like Rick has more experience with that than we probably do. But that's how we do it.
Yeah, so we do have some customers internationally. They're actually using their own trunks, right? So we did not have to procure those numbers and that for them. Here in the US, IntelliPeer is our carrier, and we've got a number of different trunks going to between KBS and IntelliPeer. So they have a wide range that they cover, a lot of LATAs. So we've run into very, very few issues when it comes to porting numbers over, and you've got 911 up here, right? They handle that very well. There's multiple types of bundles that you can get with IntelliPeer. The one that we lead with is one that has the 911 charges and all of that included.
Great. So yeah, whoever owns the DIDs, usually it's the 911, and 911 is in the US, but the emergency routing on that. Do you guys either use a service like Intrado or any of those to allow the customer themselves to kind of put in their location or change any of that? Either one of you? Have you
No.
seen a need for that? Okay.
No,
I think there's a need in Canada for that, but we haven't used it.
Got it. Okay. Let's go to the next question unless there's some questions. Sharon?
Yeah.
Okay. So network settings, this is always one that tends to come up, and our partners come to us and say, hey, there's so many different firewalls out there that are owned by them or put in by their brother-in-law, that is their IT person, let's say, if they're a smaller business, and they may not staff a data team or an IT team. So all those different firewalls and routers, if you're not providing them, someone else is, but there's special settings and all. So do you document this? How do you handle that? How do you engage with them? And let's start with you, Rick.
Yeah, so there are a lot of various models out there. A lot of those, again, we have customers where we manage that firewall. It's obviously a much easier because it's within our control. We can pull in that team to help make those settings. Some of the things that we've run into, obviously the big one would be SIP ALG, right? That can cause just a world of hurt when you're doing a deployment. So you got to get out in front of that. Some of the other things that we have seen is SD-WAN. So it may not hinder necessarily the registration of the phone or just making a basic inbound outbound call, But when you have a lot of BLFs, when you're trying to move calls around, if it's a call coming in to a receptionist trying to transfer somewhere else, oftentimes SD-WAN and the way that the firewall will load balance between the two carriers can cause issues there. So you need to set up firewall rules that say anything going to KBS, is going to be primary on one ISP and then completely fell over to the other ISP if it's saturated, and try to keep that traffic on a single ISP, because when it tries to load balance, especially across the sessions, it can cause some issues. So that's the biggest thing that we've seen. Obviously, in larger environments, you want to do things like stand up a voice VLAN, have your phones be in that, have that be segregated from everything else, and be able to apply QoS and things of that nature. We see that more in the larger customers, larger deployments, up 100, 200 and above phones. Those clients that are smaller than that, you can usually get away with keeping it on a flat network, but it's definitely a conversation that you got to have going in, right? You don't want to increase the cost of deploying the solution too much by forcing them to do a lot of work on the network. So again, it's a lot of having that conversation up front, setting those expectations with the customer of we'll try it. If we run into issues, here's the first steps that we need to take.
And you document those, and you as part of the initial package and kind of testing.
Yeah, we've got a lot of internal notes that, nothing that's really published, but we've got things that we can share with the client or with their IT vendor if they're the one who's managing the network.
Right. What about you, Rico?
So I agree with everything that Rick said. The only thing I guess I'll add to that is, obviously we try to put in a voice VLAN. The limitation is when they want to do soft clients, you can't really control the soft client over voice VLAN. So if it's a desktop, if it's a desk phone deployment, then that works. If it's not, then it's more complicated. And now you're talking about the size of the circuit and the firewall settings, and you want to prioritize KBS. Obviously, SIP ALG always has to be turned off, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. So if you were to kind of nail down one or two things that are probably the most important things from a network setting standpoint, you both have mentioned SIP ALG and that's something that you want to recommend turning off, and it's called something else in different firewalls and all. But what's the most important thing that if you were telling a customer, because if your service is only as good as the bandwidth that it's riding on, and if you didn't bring that bandwidth to the party, then what are kind of some of the most important things?
You want a circuit with an SLA, so a commercial grade circuit. So fiber is going to trump DSL. It's going to have an SLA. That's going to make a big difference. You have to open the ports on the firewalls. But I would say that having a commercial grade circuit would be my number one thing.
Okay.
Yep, I'd agree with that. The commercial grade circuit, I mean, we have run into that numerous times, right? Small businesses, a nonprofit, something like that, they have a residential offering. There's no SLA on it, and it's they get 100 meg download, but they only get 3 megs of upload, right? And that's that'll kill you. So definitely agree with that. I think just those firewall rules, prioritizing the traffic to the KBS IP addresses and trying to prioritize that as much as possible. Usually on the local LAN, you're not going to run into too many issues, but it's just making sure that that connection from the edge out is prioritized to Kandy.
Right. Great. Thank you, guys. All right, let's go to our next one here, recommended tools. And let's start out with particularly the Edgemark devices. Now, the last month we talked about in our Fireside chats, we talked about voice quality, and you guys have touched on several of the things there, but the Edgemark devices, and Edgemark is an enterprise SBC. Juxto puts it every one. Rick at I2, you guys have done it occasionally. So in those, for the Edgemark, what does it buy you? That's a great tool. I mean, it sounds like you guys at Juxto, hey, that's mandatory to do that. Why is it mandatory? What is it that you get out of that?
Well, it gives you the ability to monitor QoS, so it makes it easier to trace calls, see exactly what's happening. It enables you to troubleshoot faster, and by standardizing the environments, it becomes a lot. It just becomes easier to manage. You've got the edge view or the cloud view. You can see all the devices from a centralized point. It's just standardization, and then having some tool to monitor QoS is important, whether it's the edge marker or a different tool.
Right. And then Rick, and I've kind of line item this, but we can open this up to any other tools that you guys use as well, but particularly Rick, so what are some things that you guys are using to monitor QoS if you don't put in an edge mark?
Yeah, it typically is going to come from the firewall, right? And looking at those reports and those traffic analysis, the network assessments, seeing how much other traffic they have going in and out, and making sure that it's not going to hinder the user experience on the UC platform. So that's a big thing. Like Rico said, the edge market, it just gives you tremendous visibility. It definitely increases your efficiency in troubleshooting. Another thing that we do is there's some parameters that you can turn on a Polycom phone in those scenarios for us where we don't manage the network, and we know that we can do the capture from KBS to see what's going out to the phone. There's parameters you can turn on the Poly phones where you can do that SIP capture remotely from there as well. So we have to do a remote desktop session with the customer, but we can compare what we're seeing on the phone versus what is leaving KBS, because oftentimes when we start troubleshooting, it's kind of under the guidance of we're guilty until proven innocent, right? And so until we can lay that data out clearly to the IT administrator, right, if it's not us, until we can present that clearly, the customer's going to just assume that it's coming out as a bad experience when I'm on the phone, so it's got to be the phone guy's fault.
Right. I think we do have a question here on the edge view piece of that. So I see it here, Sharon, I'll go ahead. So Rico, are you a distributor of edge mark devices, or are you buying that from a distributor? Do you buy directly from Ribbon?
We buy directly from Ribbon.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Rick, what about you guys? When you do deploy it, do you buy direct from Ribbon, or do you get it from a distributor?
No, I believe we buy that directly from Ribbon.
Okay, got it. So what about, we have a network
Sarah,
observation.
It sounds like the person might be trying to identify a distributor that sells EdgeMark. And I know that 888 VoIP is a distributor of EdgeMark. They might be a good contact.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So the network observation device that we sell, have either of you deployed that? Is that something that?
Rarely.
Okay.
Yeah, rarely, but we have, right? And it does provide good data, right? It feeds it into the KBS admin portal, and you can pull some stats from there. So not widely spread, but we have deployed it before.
Okay. And then what about SIP phone vendor tools? Both of you said use Poly and, have used Yealink as well. Any SIP phone vendor tools that you use?
Well, we've deployed some Poly solutions for larger on-prem clients, right, that are not KBS customers, or at least at that site they're not. So we have used that before, but primarily it's just using KBS to administer those endpoints.
Mm-hmm. Got it. What about the Polycom? What is it? Polycom device management?
Yeah,
is that
PRTM. Yeah, that's what we've deployed in the past. And of course, I'm drawing a blank on the acronym myself right now.
Yeah, me too. It's
PBMS.
PBMS. Yeah.
PBMS.
Right. Great. So that's some, and I know some of them will also remotely, if it's controlled by that, then you can remotely reboot it and some of that kind of stuff. I know some of our partners have definitely used that. Now, I know both of you do like a network assessment. Can you tell me about that? Rico, tell me about yours that you do, and where in the process.
Sure. And it probably could have come up during remote logistics, but the first thing we do is we do a site survey. And so we charge for that. If the end user doesn't want to pay for it, then they're able to complete the questionnaire. But if they complete it inaccurately and then there's a problem downstream, then that would create a chargeable event. But let's assume that they don't want to provide it, so we'll send the field tech out that's going to do the installation, send them out, they'll do a site survey, they'll fill out the questionnaire, they'll come back. Once we get the site survey, we coordinate an internal call with our network engineers, and then ultimately another call with the client's IT. We make some decisions around the Edgemark deployment. There's 3 ways we can deploy it, behind the firewall, in front of the firewall. There's a variety of ways. They agree on the deployment strategy. We all agree on the topology and architecture of the deployment. A week before they go live, we install the edge devices. We take the phones, we make sure that we can place calls, everything works. Sometimes it doesn't work, and so we try to get that resolved prior to cutover. For a long time, we were shipping and doing everything the day of cutover, and inevitably you have problems or things that are unexpected, and we just learned
Anxiety.
we just learned to do it a week before. Yeah.
Right. What do you do, Rick?
Yeah, so as needed, we have some network monitoring tools that we can drop in that would garner some insight, into that network. So we don't always do that. The biggest thing I would say in that regard, like I said, going back to the firewall, looking at some reports and seeing the traffic that's going in and out. But the biggest thing that Rico said that I wholeheartedly agree with is that testing. Right, you got to get some phones up on the network. You need to make calls. You need to go through every scenario and make sure that you're not running into any issues. So that cutover, the day of cutover is very clean. So there's assessments that you can run. We have a big spreadsheet that we have our customers fill out as well from a UC database, as well as much insight into that network, so that if and when we start troubleshooting, we have an idea of what we're getting into. But the biggest thing is testing and trying to get out in front of that before you go in production.
Great. Now, we talked about this previously, but they have a few things that they'll share with us too, both of them, and I'll package them in the replay so that you can take a look at those, whether it's a network assessment or some of the different things that they use in the documentation for this. So, talking about day of cutover, how do you differentiate yourself? Because now you're up against, the other guys that are over the top. They're not providing all of this, and most of you focus on the fact that you have great customer service. You have this white glove type of engagement with your customers, and you're differentiating yourself. So how do you do that when everything is remote on the day of cutover? Rico, I'll give it to you first.
Sure, no problem. So let's talk about training, because the training does happen remote. We do offer an in-person training. No one's ever paid for it, so we've never actually had to do it. And so we figured out a way to train remotely. The first thing we do is we identify the users in the environment that will be the most sensitive at the time of migration, i.e. the receptionist or maybe some executive admins. We've learned that if we cater to them, that 80% of the anxiety at cutover will be managed. And if you don't, they always have this sense of they're not ready or they weren't trained. And the reality is they bear the brunt of the migration because they're fielding, the majority of the volume of calls. And so we try to cater to them. They get their own kind of concierge training. Maybe we even do 2 or 3 trainings with them, do some mock calls, really try to get them to be comfortable. But the rank and file will be trained usually the day of or a day before. So depending on the size of the staff, we'll schedule anywhere from 1 to 2 days of training, and we'll have a morning session and an afternoon session. They're about an hour long. Prior to the training, everybody gets a welcome letter. So they get an email with an email full of all the facts. So this is your username, this is your phone number, your DID, your extension, your login, your password. This is the link to the Bradio Knowledge Center for additional videos. This is the end user portal link. This is the voicemail portal link. And it's a lot of information. The intent is not really for them to digest it. We'll digest it during the training. It's more for them to have the information. What we found is a lot of times the emails used to get caught in spam. So you really have to work in advance to have the email whitelisted and make sure that it's going to go through with no spam. If it's and then ideally an environment, you test that you can download the soft client, because sometimes you'll have restrictions from IT that will block the download. So you have to work through the email, you have to work through the download of the soft client. But assuming all of that's been resolved, they get the welcome letter a day or 2 before the training. They show up to the training, and then we go through the welcome letter. The first thing we have them do is start downloading the soft client. While they're downloading the soft client, we take them through to the end user portal, make them log in. You have to log into the end user portal because you have to change the temp password. If you don't change the temp password, you can't log into the soft client. So we do that first. I forgot to mention, the welcome letter comes in 2 letters. It's the first one, and then the temp password is a second email for security purposes.
Security,
So
good.
they get
Best
2 emails.
practice.
They get the temp password second. Come in, train them, walk them through the end user portal, make them log in, show them the different modules. Now that they've logged in, they have their password for the soft client. Then we do the voicemail portal. Then we do the soft client. Then we bring up an image of the user guide of the phone. There's usually like a 2-pager guide with the buttons, and we walk them through what the buttons mean, how they work, and then we play some live phone calls on the soft client, show them how to add some favorites, how to do different things. And the training is usually about an hour and 15. And then we schedule some subsequent trainings the week after for some live Q&A. People still have questions, they can come back, and we have an unstructured half an hour. Any question you have, we'll answer it. And then people show up, they ask their questions, and essentially that's how we tackle training.
So do you find that after that, do you give them materials to put like in their network on a file server somewhere? How do you handle that?
So it depends. So some clients would prefer, like the larger clients have SharePoint and they want to upload all of the videos to their SharePoint. And so in those cases, we don't use Bradio, but in all the other cases, we have Bradio. We have, it's branded. Here's the Bradio Knowledge Center. Here are the videos. And then we usually leave them with the user guide for the phone.
Great.
So
Rick,
there are 2 questions, and then Rick, you can think about your answers to them too. So based on what you said, Rico, I think that you do allow all end users to access the portal, at least upon setup. But going forward, do you recommend that they continue to access the end user portal, or do you just leave the end user portal kind of like in the background and just let like their staff manage things?
So I think the question is conflating the end user portal with the KBS admin portal. And
yeah.
so the KBS admin portal is not part of training. If there's an admin on the environment and they want to be able to, move add changes, then they get training. So the KBS portal, the admin portal, that is not part of training. We do not recommend training regular staff for that. The end user portal, I can't think of any reason not to educate them on its existence. The reality is a very, very small percentage will ever use it. But we've at least done our job. We've trained them, we've shown them it exists, they have documentation how to use it. If they elect not to use it, that's perfectly fine. But I can't think of any reason not to show the end user portal. But
Yeah.
I suppose some clients would prefer to keep it simpler. But if you're going to use the soft client, then you can't really get around it because you have to change the temp password.
Correct. Okay, the second question is, when you do the training with the users, do you set up like a collaboration session and kind of train them on video like we're doing now?
Yes, and so my tip there is that we always ask the client to host the call so that they can record the meeting and the recording lives in their environment. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to share a recording from my environment to my clients. I've never been able to get it to work. So I used to download to Dropbox and try to send it, and I just stopped. I just said, you know what? You organize the call, you invite me, you record it, you've got it. Simple.
That is an awesome tip. Thank you.
And Rick, what do you guys do? How you kind of do training and differentiating your services in an over-the-top?
Yeah, so I think very similar to what Rico said, right? It comes down to getting folks get their hands on it before production, before cutover, right? Getting them familiar with it, knowing how to make calls in and out. So training comes in a variety of shapes and forms, whether it's getting everybody on a call and going through some of those features, or giving them some documentation to distribute to the broader community while just doing the training with the power users or the train the trainer mentality, right? One of the things that Rico said that I very much agree with, that we try to, make sure as much as possible is completed, is you've got to train that power user, right? The receptionist, the CEO's admin assistant, whichever it might be, you've got to make sure that those folks are happy and can route their calls, because it is so much a part of their day-to-day. So it comes in a variety of shapes and forms. Again, we kind of have a broad spectrum of clients from a size perspective. So really dependent upon the client as to how that training goes. Always follow it up with the documentation and those leave behinds. The user guides and things like that, turning them over to the Bradio site, like Rico mentioned, is good. What I have, regarding access to the end user portal, I have had customers say, I don't even talk about that to my users. They're going to get in there and start pointing and clicking around, and they're going to, set up rules and not know they did it, and it's just going to cause more frustration. But I agree with Rico, right? It's a feature that's there. It's something that makes the platform sticky within the environment. If you can train those end users on how to set up those routing rules and how to leverage their address book and things like that, the more they know about the platform, the more they incorporate it into their day-to-day, the stickier the product becomes.
And a lot of the end user, the find me, follow me kind of routing rules and all, you set them up once and you don't really have to go back and do it. So if you do it in training and they know how to, vacation, you use those use cases in your training.
Yep.
Question I have for both of you, do you actually staff a trainer, or is that a contractor for you?
We have a staff trainer. So that's not their only role, right? They just know the system well enough to train on it. Yeah.
What about you, Rick?
Yeah, we don't have anybody dedicated just for training.
Okay. So it's whoever, at the time they're kind of a shared resource. Got
Correct.
it.
Sarah, I do have one more tip that I thought about.
Yeah.
I used to only provide access to Bradio at the very end, so at the training. And then I had one of the project managers, on the client side, complain that I didn't give them the chance to study or learn the videos in advance,
Wow.
And I thought, you weren't going to watch the videos until now, regardless. But my learning was we have a welcome email with the client. When we do the first kickoff call, there's a welcome email. Welcome to Juxo. I'm your project manager. This is the date of your first call. I started including the Bradio link on that email at the beginning, at the outset of the project, and I did it knowing that they're not going to check it, but it removed that complaint. You can't say I didn't give you enough time. You've had it since the beginning of the project, and so you can no longer blame me for your lack of watching the video. And so that was something I thought might be good to share.
Yep, I agree with that, because the more that those end users, if it's the whole end user community or those power users, the more they can come in to that training session with, even if it's a limited amount of information, right? It's just going to make that training process go much, much smoother.
So how have you done? So you've got Polycom and then some physical SIP phones, that kind of stuff. What about the deck phones, the wireless, that kind of stuff? How do you train on those? They're different. Do you do them in isolation, kind of like you do the receptionist?
Yeah, we do a separate training for that.
Okay.
Yes, we've got some partners that use it, but we haven't seen it be too widespread, not too common. If you do have somebody that is maybe roaming the building, I think we see more leveraging the mobile app as opposed to the deck phone.
Good point. Okay, let's now go over to ongoing support. So let's talk about some best practices here that you guys do, and particularly what happens if you can't send a technician, right? It's in a city or location, it's just too far for you to send to, but you don't have somebody there. What do you do? And kind of your best practices around that. Let's start with you, Rick.
Sure. So when, especially with the agenda for this call, right? And kind of the assumption is that we don't have control of the underlying network. That's obviously the biggest variable that we're trying to overcome. So for me and my team, always the first step is going to be, can I register a phone here in my office and replicate that same problem? And then I'm removing their network completely, or I'm completely identifying their network as potentially being the problem. So being able to replicate what the customer is trying to do from a troubleshooting perspective, or whatever the issue is that they're reporting off of their network, becomes a critical point in troubleshooting. In addition to that, and this kind of goes back to the models of phones that we support, that is a challenge at times if they have a specific model of Yealink, which there are, a lot. So, and they're all on different firmware builds and things like that, right? So trying to replicate that as much as possible can be a challenge. So definitely, Rico, I agree with the approach of trying to limit the scope of the endpoints that you that you are supporting, but sometimes the client will dictate that conversation, and we have a wider variety. So I think to start with, we do try to replicate things in-house as much as possible. Identify, is this really a Kandy issue? Is it a parameter on the phone that is hindering this from working? Or if it's standing up a new feature, right, let me do that in-house where I'm not having to go back to the client and say, try this, and there's that back and forth. So try to do that in-house before we deploy it out to the client, and know that it's going to work whenever we make that suggestion. And then the other piece is, like I mentioned before, knowing and doing those captures from KBS and being able to have that visibility into the local network. If it's doing a capture on the phone itself, leveraging something like an edge mark, doing a capture from the firewall, right? You kind of got to put all those pieces together to help identify where any issue might be. But I think the biggest thing that we try to do to ease, especially in a break, fix, or troubleshooting scenario, is let's get that working in our desk, in our office, in a known good environment. Make sure that what we fix is going to be the fix before we roll it out.
Good point. What about you, Rico?
So, generally we can fix things remotely. And if we can't, then generally we can send a field tech. But if both of those things are not possible, then it's going to come down to the client's IT, either outsource support or somebody internally that plays that role. There really is no way around it, or the business owner is going to be doing it, because what's left. At some point there really is no other options, and so that happens. But that's a function of the size of the end user, right? The larger they are, their systems, they have IT support or the IT personnel. The smaller and cheaper they get, they might cut corners. But so it's gonna really be a function of the demographic of your client base.
And I'm sure, I mean, we've all been in this situation where if there's an issue on site, a best practice is to get as much as you can, traces and all that kind of stuff. So you're not having to constantly come back to them, oh, I didn't get a trace, or, oh, hey, try this, and oh, try this. So having it, where you can replicate it, but also capturing the real traces of what happened, knowing the DNs, directory numbers, knowing the phones, MAC addresses, all that kind of stuff that are engaged. And if you do have to open up a case with Kandy technical support, giving them as much up front in how you duplicated it, I'm sure those make a big difference in the frustration level that the end customer will experience. So any other things on that that you guys, either one, would recommend to people?
No, I mean, just kind of like I said earlier, right? When we're working with a third-party IT staff, whether it's the customer's IT staff or some other partner that they're using, we often have to go in with the mindset of we're guilty till proven innocent, right? So like you said, Sarah, it is trying to gather all that information and lay it out very clearly to identify where that problem is, and it's just going to help get to resolution that much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say the only thing I would add to that is, I guess, educating the client on the information that you need to troubleshoot effectively and efficiently. So a lot of times they'll call and they'll just say, the call dropped. Okay, that's not enough information to troubleshoot. So it's like, what was the time of the call? Who called who? Exactly what happened? So educating them to give you proper information when they open the ticket, so that you don't spend all this time trying to, get information that they could have given you at the outset.
Good point. So do we have any questions?
Yes, we
Sharon?
do. So one of them is, do you use assurance for troubleshooting?
So that's the new voice quality metrics that we added in. And you know, the RTCP-XR and that kind of stuff and the CDR kind of all fall into that. So have you guys been using that?
I have not got my hands on it personally. I'd have to get with the team and
Fairly
see how
new.
much they've been using it.
I'm in the same boat as Rick. I can't speak to whether the team has or hasn't.
Okay. The other questions out here have to do with the SIP call setup and tear down and where we can find that information. Do we have it to troubleshoot within the portal somewhere?
Are you talking about doing the SIP line trace from
Yeah.
the admin portal? Yeah, yes, that is there, right? So you got to put in, like Rico mentioned, you want to get as much of those specifics as you can, but you can go pull that line trace.
Okay. So Mike, you asked the question. We'll get back to you after the call with exactly how you do that. Those are all of the questions so far.
Okay. Any others or anything while we're waiting on some of the questions to come in? Are there any other things as you would make recommendations to anybody who's going to start offering these types of services as they plan? You know, what about a CLEC license, anything like that? What are your thoughts on that? If they're, do they need to go get licensed in other countries in order to do an over the top?
I don't think so. I wouldn't be able to answer that specifically about the CLEC question. My only other thought would be, you know, it is, I guess you can be leery going into a situation where you don't control the network, but I wouldn't be too worried about it, right? If you have those conversations up front with the client, like Rico said, if you do that network assessment and whether that's a paid engagement or not, what's going to make it a good experience is more in the communication as opposed to the actual technical work that is getting done. So set those expectations up front with the client. I would not hesitate or be afraid to go in and deploy KBS on top of any network. You just got to know what you're getting into and set those expectations with the client.
Right.
Who does your network assessment, Rick? Do you do that remotely? Do you send the customer a questionnaire, or do you actually physically send someone out?
No, we are very rarely would we send somebody out unless there's other services that we're doing along with it, right? And with a lot of our clients, we do manage their network, so we have that visibility already. You know, that's not saying that we are the internet provider, but we manage the firewall and the network switches and things of that nature. So there's a spreadsheet that we can give them to fill out just so that we have an idea of the layout of their environment. There are some network monitoring tools that we can and have deployed in the past that can kind of give us a snapshot of that environment by deploying a collector on site, letting it crawl the network, and then we can see what's connected to what and get an idea very quickly of how that network is set up.
Thank you.
And Rico, anything that you would add to that as far as somebody's, you know, they're in their footprint that they operate and manage in, everything soup to nuts, and if they're going to offer something outside of that, any recommendations to them?
Well, I mean, I think of our journey as a new reseller, right? And I think of some of the things that aren't technical, but that were challenging, were things like billing, taxation, communications tax. You know, these are things, you know, everybody's focused on making the phones work, and that's obviously important. But you know, CDR becomes challenging, right? All these other things become daunting in that journey. And so, you know, maybe there's some advice we can give as it relates to that. But I know that's not the focus of today's topic.
But it does include that. You're exactly right. There's commercial aspects of it. So if you're not having to charge, you know, slicks and those types of things as much, so you may price it differently, looking at things competitively of who you're up against and being honest with it. It's not just the traditional telcos that you're competing against. You're competing against the 8x8, the Ring Central, the Vonage, and there's a myriad of them out there. So yeah, looking at what they're offering too.
There was a question earlier in the webinar that asked if we bundled the cost of the device with the service, and I said we didn't, but I didn't really explain why. We took this path of breaking out every possible line item with the intention of mitigating communications tax. So if you start bundling software with PSTN, you start conflating what needs to be charged communications tax. And that does a disservice to the end user because they end up paying more, and it also does a disservice to you because you start to approach that de minimis threshold with the federal government, and so you want to stay under that threshold as long as possible, from a filing standpoint. But so we've always broken everything out a la carte. The cost of the DID is separate from the cost of the toll-free number or the minutes or the usage separate from the KBS license, and so these are some areas that we can maybe provide some guidance that we haven't talked about.
Yeah, taxing is a big deal, right? And is hardware included in that or not, right? Because that all affects taxes. And if you're talking about going outside your footprint, right, depending on what state or what county within that state or what city you're in, those taxes are going to look different. I talk more often than I would like to our finance guys. Not that they're not great guys, but taxes is not something that gets me excited. But it's definitely
yeah.
that you have to consider.
And our journey commenced in Canada, and so Canada doesn't have this problem. Canada has a national sales tax, and so it's incredibly simple. The U.S. is not the same. The U.S. is very, very, very complicated.
It is. I was talking to another partner in Australia not too long ago, and he said setting up business here in the States is very complex compared to there in Australia. So, and not a lot of things are online to be able to do. You got to go in person and lots of things like that. So, great.
So another question. There's one more question out here. So it's when you use the edge marks, you can get the edge view software. And how do you get that? And Jerry, I can tell you that if you go to 888 VoIP to buy the edge marks, they can tell you who to work with on the edge view software. They'll give you direction on that. So I don't know who the exact company is where the edge view software is, but 888 VoIP can give you some direction.
Yeah, I mean, Ribbon is a Ribbon solution. 888 just resells it. Then you pay a monthly fee. You pay less for the device, but you pay a monthly fee for the edge view.
Right. Great. Well, thank you everyone for participating in the call, and thank you in advance for those of you who are going to catch this on the replay. From Juxto, Ricardo, and from I Squared, Rick, you've been wonderful to host on this. We appreciate your honesty and your feedback on helping others in this. So again, kudos to joining and allowing yourself to be asked questions and all that kind of stuff, not being in the hot seat, but kind of being in the hot seat. So appreciate you both doing that. And we appreciate your business. Thanks to everybody who's on the webinar. And again, we appreciate your business. Our next webinar is next month. It is on making collaboration smarter. So do go to kandy.io/events, and you can register there for any upcoming, as well as go and look at any previous webinars. For those of you who registered, you'll get an email with the webinar link and any supporting documentation around it. So again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you guys next month.
Yep. Thank you, Sarah, Sharon.